certainly not by nuclear weapons. It also talks about how Russia's concerns have to be addressed, but essentially moving, or at least trying to move both sides to some kind of a negotiated settlement, if not a ceasefire to start with, and then eventually to a negotiated settlement. The problem is, both from Moscow and from Kiev, the response to this 12-point peace plan put forth by China was rather lukewarm, and that is because for Russia,
पाकिस्तान नाल लिखता है जी
किस तरीके ਨਾਲ ਲਿਖਿਆ ਹੈ
आईएसआई कुछ रिपोर्ट्स में कहा गया कि आईएसआई कनेक्शन है तो क्या
है वो
आईएसआई
Amritpal still on the run, and a mega crackdown against his organization at the top of 5 p.m. today at Nation at 5. That's the story we discussed. And also, more importantly, the international angles emerging to the story and the kind of support and funding his organization has been receiving from certain banned Khalistani outfits. Now, amid the massive manhunt launched by Punjab police to nab Varis Punjab the chief Amritpal Singh, his uncle Harjeet Singh has surrendered before the police. Now, the police has also seized SUV from Harjeet Singh. This is the same car in which Amritpal was evading earlier. So far, a total of 112 people have been arrested, out of which 32 were arrested today. The latest CCTV footage has also emerged where police can be seen chasing behind Amritpal's convoy. Flag marches by district police and paramilitary forces company personnel by SSP and SCP have also been held all over the state. Internet services in Punjab have been suspended till further orders. The police in a latest briefing has said that so far they cannot tell for how long the internet services will remain shut down, but this is a measure that they have taken in the interest of larger law and order.
मैं सारे सिटीजन्स को रिक्वेस्ट करूंगा कि किसी भी तरह की कोई फेक न्यूज़ र्यूमर्स उस पर बिलीव ना करें, फैक्ट्स पहले चेक कर लें। जो जितने भी इसमें बैड एलिमेंट्स इन्वॉल्व हैं उसमें हम आईएसआई का एंगल, उनकी फॉरेन फंडिंग, हमें सस्पिशन है कि इसमें आईएसआई का एंगल भी है, फॉरेन फंडिंग भी है, उस पर फर्दर इन्वेस्टिगेशन हमारी चल रही है। सो एनएसए ਜਿਹੜਾ ਐਨਐਸਏ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਹੈ ਜੀ, ਜਿਹਦੇ ਕੋਲੋਂ ਥ੍ਰੈਟ ਹੋਵੇ ਸਿਕਿਉਰਿਟੀ ਆਫ ਸਟੇਟ ਨੂੰ ਡਿਸਟਰਬ ਕਰਨ ਦਾ ਜਾਂ ਪਬਲਿਕ ਹਾਰਮਨੀ ਨੂੰ ਡਿਸਟਰਬ ਕਰਨ ਦਾ, ਉਹਨੂੰ ਤੱਥਾਂ ਦੇ ਆਧਾਰ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਲਗਾਇਆ ਜਾ ਸਕਦਾ, ਜਿਹੜਾ ਕਿ ਇਸ ਕੇਸ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਲਗਾਇਆ ਗਿਆ ਹੈ।
अमृतपाल जी बारे वो भी चिंतित सी कि वो क्यों अजे तक उन्होंने कोई पता, वो कहते सानू पुछया ने कि तुहानू कोई उसकी जानकारी है, तो वो बारे सानू तो यो मीडिया के थ्रू ही पता है भी अजे तक वो पुलिस कह रही है भी नहीं, सानू नहीं पता वो बारे एवें बेवकूफी बकवास किया जा रहा है, खाली बदनाम किया जा रहा है। ऐसे जी कोई गल नहीं, तुसीं भी डेली जाते सी उत्थे, इन्हां पुलिस ने भी सर्च की है। ये क्या उन्होंने अपने जिहड़े बंदे सी उहदा नाम आनंदपुर खालसा फौज, जिद्दां अपन निहंग सिंह फौजां कह दिंदे आ, एक नॉर्मल सी गल सी कि उन्होंने एवें वधा चढ़ा के 5-7 बंदियां ना फौज, वो जिन्ने बंदे शुरू तो ही उन्ने ही हुण तक सी, फौज किहड़ी फौज तैयार कीती इन्होंने।
My colleague Anshul has been tracking all the details from Punjab, getting us more details on that story. Anshul, there were important details, which of course were not sensitive, that were shared by the IGP in the press conference that he conducted some time ago. Tell us about the number of people who've been arrested. What is the kind of manhunt that has been launched by the Punjab police? And the IGP also mentioned that they are in close coordination with other state police authorities and also the central agencies to ensure that this man doesn't run out of the country.
Well, definitely there is a massive manhunt that has been launched all across Punjab at this point in time. In fact, if you see, there were 11 people who were travelling in that cavalcade with Amritpal Singh in 4 vehicles. All those 4 vehicles have been seized, weapons have been recovered, and in fact 9 people have been taken into custody as well. In fact, 9 people have been arrested as well. Just 2 people are missing from that cavalcade, that is Amritpal Singh and one of his very close associates who was travelling in that Mercedes car with him as well. So it is suspected that both these people are together at this point in time, and hence the Punjab police is continuing with its manhunt. But yes, on the other hand, if you see the supporters of Amritpal Singh, the die-hard supporters of Amritpal Singh who were in villages of Amritsar and Taran, they have been taken into custody so that they do not create any sort of law and order problem. Approximately 124 people have already been arrested by the Punjab police and have been many of them have been detained as well. In fact, 5 people who have been arrested, NSA has been slapped on them and they have been sent to Dibrugarh in Assam as well. So yes, the Punjab police is trying to make sure that the law and order situation in Punjab remains under control, because remember, they were pushed to a corner when the entire incident of Ajnala happened, and the manner in which we saw that Amritpal Singh actually went inside that police station and vandalized, took control of that police station as well. So yes, there was a lot of questions that were being raised on the ability of the Punjab police to control the law and order situation, and this is the kind of messaging that the Punjab police is giving out at this point in time. Flag marches are being conducted across the state of Punjab, just trying to give this message that the police is very vigilant and the people do not need to worry and do not need to believe in any sort of rumors.
Well, last time, you know what had happened when some men related to Amritpal Singh were arrested. They created a ruckus outside a police station. There were huge tensions that had emerged in a city. There was a police station that was under attack. So clearly, this time the police was very cautious and covert in their operation. Right now, there's a press conference by the Aam Aadmi Party, which is in government in the state of Punjab. Let's try and cut across.
ਉਹਨੂੰ ਪੂਰਾ ਕੰਟਰੋਲ 'ਚ ਰੱਖਿਆ ਔਰ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਪਿਛਲੇ ਕਈ ਦਿਨਾਂ ਤੋਂ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦੇ ਅੰਦਰ, ਦੇਸ਼ ਦੇ ਅੰਦਰ, ਬਾਹਰਲੇ ਦੇਸ਼ਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜੋ ਕੁਝ ਲੋਕ ਸਾਡੇ ਤੇ ਸਵਾਲ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਸਨ, ਸਾਨੂੰ ਪੁੱਛ ਰਹੇ ਸਨ ਕਿ ਸਥਿਤੀ ਨੂੰ ਕਿੱਦਾਂ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਹੈਂਡਲ ਕੀਤਾ ਜਾਊਗਾ, ਕਿੱਦਾਂ ਕੰਟਰੋਲ ਕੀਤਾ ਜਾਊਗਾ। ਅੱਜ ਉਹੀ ਲੋਕ, ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਮੈਂ ਅਜਨਾਲਾ ਵਿਧਾਨ ਸਭਾ ਹਲਕੇ ਤੋਂ ਚੁਣ ਕੇ ਆਇਆ, ਮੈਨੂੰ ਅਜਨਾਲੇ ਤੋਂ ਸੈਂਕੜੇ ਕਾਲਾਂ ਆਈਆਂ, ਮੈਨੂੰ ਦੇਸ਼ਾਂ ਵਿਦੇਸ਼ਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚੋਂ, ਪੰਜਾਬ ਚੋਂ NRI ਮਹਿਕਮਾ ਮੇਰੇ ਕੋਲ ਹੈ। ਬਹੁਤ ਸਾਰੇ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਨੇ ਪਿਛਲੇ 2 ਦਿਨ ਤੋਂ ਕਾਲਾਂ ਕੀਤੀਆਂ ਕਿ ਜੋ ਕੁਝ ਜਿਸ ਢੰਗ ਨਾਲ ਮਾਨ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਨੇ ਸਥਿਤੀ ਨੂੰ ਸਾਂਭਿਆ, ਉਹ ਵਧਾਈ ਦੇ ਹੱਕਦਾਰ ਨੇ, ਲੋਕ ਖੁਸ਼ ਨੇ ਔਰ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਹੁਣ ਲੱਗਾ ਕਿ ਯਾਰ ਵਾਕਿਆ ਹੀ ਐਡੀ ਗੰਭੀਰ ਸਥਿਤੀ ਨੂੰ ਕੰਟਰੋਲ ਕਰਨਾ ਔਰ ਕਿਸੇ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਦਾ, ਗੁਰੂ ਗ੍ਰੰਥ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਜੀ ਤੋਂ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦੇ ਕਿਸੇ ਵੀ ਸਿੱਖ ਦਾ, ਕਿਸੇ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਦਾ, ਕਿਸੇ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦੀ ਗਲੀ ਦਾ, ਪਿੰਡ ਦਾ ਕਿਤੇ ਕੋਈ ਨੁਕਸਾਨ ਨਹੀਂ ਕੀਤਾ, ਕਿਤੇ ਕੋਈ ਅਥਰੂ ਗੈਸ, ਕਿਤੇ ਕੋਈ ਲਾਠੀ ਚਾਰਜ, ਕਿਤੇ ਕੋਈ ਗੋਲੀ, ਕਿਤੇ ਕੁਛ ਨਾ ਕਰਦੇ ਹੋਏ ਜਿਸ ਢੰਗ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਸਥਿਤੀ ਨੂੰ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਸੰਭਿਆ, ਕੰਟਰੋਲ ਕੀਤਾ, ਉਹ ਇੱਕ ਸ਼ਲਾਘਾਯੋਗ ਕਦਮ ਹੈ ਔਰ ਪੂਰੇ ਦੁਨੀਆ ਦੇ ਲੋਕ ਇਸ ਗੱਲ ਤੇ ਖੁਸ਼ ਨੇ। ਔਰ ਇੱਕ ਗੱਲ ਸਪਸ਼ਟ ਹੋ ਗਈ ਕਿ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਸਰਦਾਰ ਭਗਵੰਤ ਸਿੰਘ ਮਾਨ ਜੀ ਦੀ ਅਗਵਾਈ ਹੇਠ ਵਿਕਾਸ ਦੀਆਂ ਲੀਹਾਂ ਤੇ ਚੱਲ ਰਿਹਾ। ਜਿਹੜਾ ਵੀ ਕੋਈ ਬੰਦਾ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਵਿਕਾਸ ਦੀਆਂ ਲੀਹਾਂ ਤੋਂ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਨੂੰ ਲਾਉਣ ਦੀ ਕੋਸ਼ਿਸ਼ ਕਰੂਗਾ, ਉਸ ਬੰਦੇ ਦੇ ਅਗੇਂਸਟ ਸਖਤ ਕਾਰਵਾਈ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਕੀਤੀ ਜਾਊਗੀ। ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦੇ
Mr. Bhagwant Mann, Punjab is moving towards the path of development, and anybody who is trying to disrupt that development process, strict action would be taken against that person.
ਲੈਪਟਾਪਾਂ ਦੀ ਲੋੜ ਹੈ। ਜਿਹੜੀ ਕੋਸ਼ਿਸ਼ ਸਰਦਾਰ ਭਗਵੰਤ ਸਿੰਘ ਮਾਨ ਜੀ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਆ, ਜਿੰਨਾ ਵਿਕਾਸ, ਜਿੰਨਾ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਨੌਕਰੀਆਂ ਦਿੱਤੀਆਂ,
Bhagwant Singh Mann has put in the amount of employment he has generated.
ਉਦੋਂ ਵਿਕਾਸ ਦੀਆਂ ਲੀਹਾਂ ਤੋਂ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਨੂੰ ਸਰਦਾਰ ਭਗਵੰਤ ਸਿੰਘ ਮਾਨ ਜੀ ਦੀ ਸਰਕਾਰ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਕਦੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਲੱਥਣ ਦਊਗੀ। ਸੋ 3 ਦਿਨ ਤੋਂ ਜਿਸ ਢੰਗ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ, ਜਿਸ ਤਰੀਕੇ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਸਾਰੀ ਸਥਿਤੀ ਤੇ ਕੰਟਰੋਲ ਕੀਤਾ, ਇਹ ਪਹਿਲੀ ਵਾਰ ਏਦਾਂ ਹੋਇਆ। ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਵੀ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਸਾਰੇ ਮੀਡੀਆ ਲੋਕ ਜਾਣਦੇ ਹੋ, ਜਦੋਂ ਕਿਤੇ ਏਦਾਂ ਦੀ ਸਥਿਤੀ ਨੂੰ ਪਹਿਲੇ ਲੀਡਰਾਂ ਨੇ ਕੰਟਰੋਲ ਕਰਨ ਦੀ ਕੋਸ਼ਿਸ਼ ਕੀਤੀ ਤੇ ਬਹੁਤ ਸਾਰਾ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦਾ ਨੁਕਸਾਨ ਹੋਇਆ। ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦੇ ਬਹੁਤ ਲੋਕ, ਪੰਜਾਬ ਨੂੰ ਅੱਗ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਝੋਕ ਦਿੱਤਾ ਗਿਆ। ਪਰ ਅੱਜ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਉਹ ਬਹੁਤ ਚੰਗੇ ਢੰਗ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ, ਬਹੁਤ ਅੱਛੇ ਢੰਗ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦੀ ਪੁਲਿਸ ਨੇ ਸਰਦਾਰ ਭਗਵੰਤ ਸਿੰਘ ਮਾਨ ਦੀ ਅਗਵਾਈ ਹੇਠ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦੇ ਪੁਲਿਸ ਅਫਸਰਾਂ ਨੇ, ਮੁਲਾਜ਼ਮਾਂ ਨੇ ਬਹੁਤ ਹੀ ਵਧੀਆ ਢੰਗ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਸਥਿਤੀ ਨੂੰ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਕੰਟਰੋਲ ਕੀਤਾ। ਔਰ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਸਾਡੇ ਤੇ ਬਾਰ-ਬਾਰ ਕਿਹਾ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਸੀ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕੋਈ ਸਰ ਮਤਲਬ ਕੋਈ ਕਾਰਵਾਈ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ, ਤੁਸੀਂ ਵੀ ਜਦੋਂ ਮਿਲਦੇ ਸੀ ਕਈ ਵਾਰ ਪੁੱਛਦੇ ਸੀ ਕਿ ਸਰ ਕਾਰਵਾਈ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੋ ਰਹੀ। ਸੋ ਅਸੀਂ ਉਦੋਂ ਹੀ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਸੀ ਕਿ ਅਸੀਂ ਉਦਾਂ ਦਾ ਕੰਮ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਰਨਾ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੇ ਜਿਹਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਪੰਜਾਬ 'ਚ ਕਿਸੇ ਦਾ ਕੋਈ ਨੁਕਸਾਨ ਹੋਵੇ, ਕਿਸੇ ਸਾਡੇ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਦਾ
but we want to assure them that we will never take any action, but the time would come.
ਜਿਸ ਢੰਗ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਮਾਨ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਇਸ ਸਥਿਤੀ ਨੂੰ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਨਜਿੱਠਦੇ ਆ, ਮੈਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਵਧਾਈ ਦੇਣਾ ਚਾਹੁੰਦਾ, ਸਲੂਟ
I want
ਕਰਨਾ
to
ਚਾਹੁੰਦਾ।
congratulate the Chief Minister Bhagwant Singh Mann
ਵੀ ਸਲੂਟ ਕਰਨਾ ਚਾਹੁੰਦਾ ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਨੇ ਮਤਲਬ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਵੀ ਅਜਨਾਲੇ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਵੀ ਸਥਿਤੀ ਨੂੰ ਬਹੁਤ
I want
ਵਧੀਆ
to
ਢੰਗ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ
salute the
ਨਜਿੱਠਿਆ
police
ਤੇ ਹੁਣ ਵੀ
which handled the situation in Ajnala very professionally.
ਲੋਕਾਂ ਨੇ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦੇ ਅਮਨ ਕਾਨੂੰਨ ਦੀ ਸਥਿਤੀ ਨੂੰ ਵਿਗਾੜ ਦੀ ਕੋਸ਼ਿਸ਼
Those who wanted to vitiate the peace and law and order situation in Punjab,
ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦੀ ਸਰਕਾਰ ਸਰਦਾਰ
a
ਭਗਵੰਤ
message
ਸਿੰਘ
is
ਮਾਨ
given
ਦੀ
to them
ਹੇਠ
that the Punjab government under the leadership of Bhagwant Mann,
ਭਗਵੰਤ ਸਿੰਘ ਮਾਨ ਤੇ
the
ਜਿਤਾਇਆ
faith
92
which
ਐਮਐਲਏ
the people
ਜਿਤਾਏ
of Punjab has
ਉਹ
shown on
ਸਰਕਾਰ
Bhagwant
ਨੇ
Singh Mann,
ਲੋਕਾਂ ਦਾ ਭਰੋਸਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਟੁੱਟਣ ਦਿੱਤਾ ਔਰ ਇੱਕ
the
ਮਜ਼ਬੂਤ
government will
ਸਰਕਾਰ
never
ਤੇ
let the
ਮਜ਼ਬੂਤ
trust of the
ਮੁੱਖ
people of
ਮੰਤਰੀ
Punjab down. This is a
ਸਾਰੀ
strong
ਸਥਿਤੀ
government.
ਜਿਹੜਾ ਅਸੀਂ ਹੈਂਡਲ ਕੀਤਾ। ਸੋ ਮੈਂ
The government has handled the situation very well.
ਪੰਜਾਬੀਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਸਿੱਖ ਭਾਈਚਾਰੇ ਨੂੰ ਮੈਂ ਕਹਿਣਾ ਚਾਹੁੰਦਾ ਕਿ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਸਰਦਾਰ ਭਗਵੰਤ ਸਿੰਘ ਮਾਨ ਦੇ ਹੱਥਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਬਿਲਕੁਲ ਸੁਰੱਖਿਅਤ ਹੈ।
Well, that was the press conference of the Aam Aadmi Party, which is arguing that they have finally done their bit and the situation, law and order situation, remains under control. Amritpal Singh will be arrested very, very soon. That's the claim that the Punjab government is making right now. But of course, the story has multiple angles. A group of people chanting pro-Khalistani slogans took down the Indian flag at the High Commission in London. There are arrests, of course, that have been made. Let's talk about that aspect of the story. And yesterday, a group of people chanting pro-Khalistani slogans took down the Indian flag at the High Commission in London. The vandals shouted Khalistani slogans, attempted to enter the High Commission, while one vandal climbed up to the Indian High Commission balcony overlooking the street and brought down the national tricolour. The window panes of the High Commission were smashed and severely damaged. Placards demanding release of the fugitive Amritpal Singh were raised as reports came in that there are some arrests that the police have made. One man has been arrested on suspicion of violent activity. The senior-most UK diplomat in New Delhi was summoned to convey India's strong protest. Meanwhile, the Sikh community also staged a protest outside UK High Commission in Delhi against the desecration of the Indian flag in London.
आजादी में सबसे बड़ा योगदान हमारा था। सिख कौम मार्शल कौम है और भारत की आजादी में सबसे ज्यादा हमारा योगदान था और आज भी हम भारत के वासी हैं। भारत माता की। हम यही मांग कर रहे हैं, जो भी कल ब्रिटिश में हुआ है वो गलत हुआ है, उसके ऊपर हम भारत के वासी हैं, इंडियन बंदे हैं और इंडिया से प्यार करते हैं अपना। इंडिया के लिए हम अपनी जान भी दे देंगे। हमारे को अगर अपनी जान देनी पड़ी तो हम अपनी जान भी दे देंगे इंडिया के पीछे।
नहीं, हम खालिस्तान के बिल्कुल खिलाफ हैं और मैं सिखों से ये गुहार लगाना चाहता हूँ, ये वही तिरंगा है जिसने अफगानिस्तान से हमारे श्री गुरु ग्रंथ साहब जी बिल्कुल सुरक्षित निकाल कर हिंदुस्तान पहुँचाए, जिसके लिए हम श्री नरेंद्र मोदी का और भारत सरकार का बहुत धन्यवाद करते हैं।
The Indian High Commission here in London, targeted by vandals, a group of Khalistanis descended on the High Commission on the afternoon of Sunday. They carried Khalistan flags, they raised Khalistan slogans. Some were carrying placards demanding the freeing of Amritpal Singh. At one point, one of the protesters climbed onto the balcony here. He pulled down the Indian flag and some people below were pulling it down. He then tried to hoist a Khalistan flag right there. At that point, he was stopped by a security man from the Indian High Commission and he came down. And all this was over a period of time. They clearly took their time doing all this. There was no police present, there was no security presence. Someone clearly called the police, and at some point a few policemen did come along on motorcycles and they confronted some of these people, but not very effectively, quite evidently from video coverage that we have seen of the incident. In fact, at one point some of these protesters pushed the police back and they had to get them out of the way. The police made a statement later saying that when they arrived, most of the protesters had left. That clearly was not the case. A number were around, but the police made no move to apprehend them or to arrest them there. The police statement says that later in the day, one person was arrested someplace away from here, and that he has been arrested on suspicion of violent disorder.
One arrest that has been made. We'll try and connect with my colleagues also and get more perspective. Mr. Rabinder Sachdev is with us on the broadcast. Good evening, Mr. Sachdev. Thank you for speaking with us. How could the London police and administration allow these vandals to have a free run right under their nose?
Thank you so much for having me. A tough question. I think one, let's give them the benefit of the doubt. Not prepared. Didn't imagine that things like this would happen. Right? That's one. Though India has been warning the UK government, the UK officials, on and on again that such incidents are happening, which they themselves know. There was something hardly a month ago, also some other protests, etc., on 15th of August also. Partly the nature is maybe also the British policing system. So there are several such reasons which we could look at as the base reasons. But yes, perhaps in the overall lack of intelligence by the British law and order agencies, I would say that would play a role, because they should have when India had informed, I think our embassy had informed that something like this is, or they knew that something like this was coming up. They thought maybe 10, 15 people, what would they do? But perhaps the numbers were more, and they were not only just gathering outside the High Commission, they, climbed the terrace and took down the Indian flag.
Allow me to interject you. Is there a reason that we should give them this benefit of doubt? Because organizations like these have been active in UK and the government has known about them.
I think the reason we could give them some benefit of doubt is that I don't see that the British government has any reason to, to not be compliant or to be not compliant or to promote anti-India sentiments within the UK. If you remember, the UK Home Ministry came out with a report, I think about 3 months ago only, which identified exactly Khalistani and extremist Islam as dangers to UK society itself. That had nothing to do with India, right? That report was to look at the issues within or the national security challenges of the UK. And it identified the Khalistan movement or people promoting Khalistan and Islamic extremists as being dangerous to the social fabric and national security of the UK. So I do not see a reason why the UK would, look askance or promote. But yes, maybe been caught napping more than once. So, once, okay, twice, okay, but third time caught napping is a shame, I would say, for the British, intelligence agencies. That's where I would begin.
Before I go back to, the focus on the domestic affairs as to what's happening in Punjab, Mr. Hemant Attri is also joining us on the broadcast. Mr. Sachdev, one more point to you. Countries like UK and Canada have friendly, in fact, more than friendly relations when it comes to our country with India. Despite these friendly relations, a lot of these organizations, especially in the country of Canada, have got a free run. They openly run an anti-India propaganda. And often the complaint from the Indian side is that the government has not done enough to keep them under check.
No, very true. That is our complaint. But you see, the counter which these countries come up with is that they say that's our, our freedom of expression, freedom of speech within our laws. People can get together, people can protest. Remember the Arab-Israeli conflicts? People would be protesting on the streets of London. People would protest in Washington, DC, Arabs against Israelis, or Jews against Arabs. So these countries have had that kind of a tradition. The thing which is happening now, the world of today has become much, much more radical.
Mr. Rabinder Sachdev getting us all the perspective. There's a technical glitch there. I want to quickly take in a word from my colleague Abhishek Jha as well. Abhishek, India has registered a strong protest. Is there anything that the UK authorities have said so far?
So far from the UK side, we have seen that the High Commission in UK had expressed his regret over such incidences occurring in United Kingdom, and so far we know that police have also taken some action, and apparently one protester who was present at the High Commissioner's during the protest has been detained or arrested. But the kind of action or the strict and prompt action that could have been from the UK authorities side, especially when they were very well informed beforehand that there is going to be such protest, has been concerning from Indian side, and this is one aspect of the concern that India has raised with the UK authorities when last night senior US diplomat was summoned and she was told about India's concern, and a strong protest was lodged against those culprits and the protest site that has happened yesterday.
Abhishek Jha getting us all the details. I want to cut across to Mr. Hemant Attri as well, who is with us on the show. He's a senior journalist. Mr. Attri, the manner in which the Punjab government was handling this entire saga pertaining to Amritpal Singh, and just a few weeks ago we had seen how his supporters and he was holding hostage a police station and more importantly issuing direct threats to the elected government of the day. Now the Punjab police has taken action. He's still on the run. What should we make of the law and order and the security situation?
No, Anushaji, it's really worrisome, and it is basically Amritpal is you can very easily say now that he was a creation of Punjab government due to its inaction. The reason was that gentleman came to India on 22nd of September last year, and for last 6 months, precisely tomorrow he will complete 6 months of his stay in India. For last 6 months from day one, what he was doing, he took over this organization, Waris Punjab, on 29th of September, within 1 week of coming, against the wishes of its founder, Deep Sidhu. He forcibly took over it. What was the Punjab police and its intelligence agencies doing? After that, he and his supporters made a ruckus in 2 of the gurdwaras, where there were certain utensils and many other things which were to be given to poor people in the form of some help, some kind of help. Punjab police still didn't take any action, and then this Ajnala thing happened. This kind of long rope we have never heard in a sensitive state like Punjab, and this is gross incompetence of Punjab's political leadership. We can't blame Punjab police for that. For the reason is, this is the political leadership which has to take a call as to how this kind of a menace is to be tackled. Once Punjab police was given clear-cut instructions, they are after him. But the thing is, who gave them such a long rope? A person like Amritpal, who is just 30 years of age, he has been caught young by the ISI. And you know what his connections are. He is not only restricted to ISI. He was directly connected with a gentleman called Pama, who runs Babbar Khalsa UK, and who in turn is directly connected with a gentleman who is sitting in Punjab, Paramjit Singh Pama, and then there is a gentleman called Khanda. But this Pama, he is sitting in Pakistan, and he heads the Babbar Khalsa organization. So see his deep interlinkages, and now Punjab police is just chasing him for last 3 days. You tell me one thing, Anusha, what was Punjab police doing for last 6 months? The reason is he was not absconding earlier. All his acts of
Mr. Attri, how should we understand the quote-unquote revival of sorts when it comes to this Khalistani movement? Punjab is peaceful and prosperous. And I remember there were various intel inputs coming in, how there are cross-border elements which are trying to fuel tensions in the state of Punjab. There is a special push to give more impetus to elements like Amritpal Singh. Is that the larger design that we are witnessing from a neighbor who has always been hostile to India? I'm talking about Pakistan.
Certainly, Anushaji, you have just nailed it. Now, going into certain details, you would be shocked to know that this whole episode, this whole saga, is being basically a part of ISI's K2 project. Earlier, they were doing all sorts of things in Kashmir. Now, they want to heaten up the Punjab state for the very simple reason that there is a huge number of youths who are unemployed. And due to this unemployment thing, they are basically wandering on the roads. Now, the drug mafia took the whole situation in its control and drugged them. They became drug addicts. Now, as you and me know that Punjab is a very prosperous state, partly it is true now, because for last 10-15 years, what has been happening? Due to lack of employment opportunities, most of the youths, They are looking for greener pastures in you can say Canada,
And Mr.
Australia,
Atri, the
Britain,
fact
and
that
so
you
many
talk
others.
about employment reminds me of that famous book that I had read when it came to the 1984 anti terror operations in the state of Punjab. And by creating employments, this was a huge push by the government of the day to ensure that militancy in the state comes down. The rising employment, unemployment is also something that the experts are citing a reason. Mr. Rabindra Sachdev and Mr. Hemant Atri, thank you gentlemen for joining us on the broadcast. Moving on. This is another big story of the day. Prime Minister Modi with Japanese Prime Minister Kishida at the Buddha Jayanti Park. Those are the latest visuals on your screen right now. This is yet another very important and strategic visit by one of India's key partners when it comes to technology exchange, multiple treaties when it comes to trade. And this visit is going to hold a lot of importance. My colleague Abhishek with us on the broadcast. Abhishek, the key agenda of the meeting, the visuals from the Buddha Jayanti Park on our screens right now.
So clearly, this is a kind of rapport that the Prime Minister shares with his counterparts across the world. We have seen how Prime Minister has taken such foreign dignitaries to various places, and this just give them an opportunity to have a very candid, free, and frank conversation while being away from the official and formal talking setup. And this is why Prime Minister has always liked it, and he has preferred to have recently we saw that Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese was in India, and Prime Minister himself was in that Ahmedabad stadium, where both had not only was cricket, but there was a space, there was a time when they could have talked with each other, in a more non-professional way. Non-professional in the sense that they didn't have any structured format to talk, structured, pointed agenda to talk. So these conversations are very important as far as bilateral ties are concerned, because clearly when two prime ministers, Indian Prime Minister and Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida, are having a conversation, they must be talking about global issues, regional issues, how to enhance and strengthen India-Japan ties, what are the areas that are unexplored, and what are the areas where they need to give more push to strengthen those areas, because clearly Japan is interested in having more robust ties with India. The capacity building, skill set, skilled workers force is something that Japan is eyeing from India. India is looking at Japan in cooperation in IT, tech, health sector, digitization and electronic equipment. There is also defense manufacturing in Japan that is very much at advanced stage, and India may enhance, may get benefit from that. So these are the bilateral professional issues that these two prime ministers will be discussing. At the same time, they'll be discussing about the other global and issues of importance as well.
Abhishek Jha getting us all the details on that very important story. Abhishek, we'll keep coming back to you. Thank you so much for getting us all those details. Well, we talk about the story and much more here on CNN News 18 on the other side of a quick break. Stay tuned.
To acquire what used to be Ukrainian territory prior to 24th of February 2022. So the problem really in the Chinese plan or any move towards peace is essentially this. If the conflict were to be frozen as it stands today, then about a fifth of Ukrainian territory will go to Russia. Is that acceptable to Ukraine? Is that acceptable to the United States, to its European partners? As of today, no. So the game that's being played by both sides, both by Russia and by Ukraine right now, is to try and force a more decisive outcome on the battlefield. From the Ukrainian point of view, that would be to try and push the Russians as far back as possible to the pre-24th February 2022 position. From the Russian side, that would be to try and fortify its existing presence in the Donbass. Remember, Putin's sort of stated objective when he launched this war was to try and get this sort of a direct line access from the Donbass through the Sea of Azov into Crimea. Crimea, of course, was annexed by Russia back in 2014. So these are the live pictures that we're getting. You can see there'll be a lot of pomp and ceremony because remember, both the Chinese and the Russians are heavy on diplomatic pageantry, as it were. So you will see a lot of that from the runway to the talks table at the Kremlin tomorrow. You're going to see a lot of pomp and pageantry associated with this visit. For Vladimir Putin, he needs Xi Jinping to try and establish some kind of legitimacy. Remember, he had been shunned by major capitals around the world, certainly by the United States, by its European partners. People were not willing to give in to Putin's aggression, thereby giving him any form of legitimacy. Xi Jinping on Russian soil in Moscow, and these pictures are being broadcast by global channels around the world, this will send a message that here is the leader of the second biggest economy in the world standing shoulder to shoulder with Putin, giving him some kind of an endorsement, if you will, despite the aggression and despite the Chinese time and time again saying that they do not believe in violation of territorial integrity or sovereignty of any nation state. Also remember, we've had these reports from both the Wall Street Journal and from Reuters that Xi Jinping, right after his visit to Moscow, is likely to speak to Vladimir Zelensky either via telephone or through a virtual call. And there again, we're given to understand that China is really pressing its foot on this 12-point peace plan. Whether or not something material will come out of that, we don't know, because like I said, if the conflict were to be frozen today, Ukraine will have to give up some territory, and that they're not in any mood to right now. Neither are their benefactors in the US and in European countries. But it depends on how much China is able to convince not just the Ukrainian side, but of course they do say China has a lot of leverage vis-a-vis Russia. But then you never know with Vladimir Putin. He's a man of his own. He has his own mind. He makes calculations basis his own interests. And his calculation going into this war certainly was that this would quickly get wrapped up. The Zelensky regime would be changed. There will be a new regime more pliable to him and to the Kremlin. That certainly hasn't happened. Ukraine is standing. Zelensky is standing. The Ukrainian people are putting up a brave fight. So Putin needs to see what is the best off-ramp that he can get if indeed his intention is to end the war as quickly as possible.
Right, and Zaka, like you've been pointing out, that if there was a solution to come at this very moment, then that would mean that Ukraine would cede a lot of ground. So that perhaps also leads many experts to believe that this 12-point plan that Xi Jinping comes with is less of a peace brokering deal, but rather perhaps to cement what Putin wants to project.
Possibly, of course. Like I said, if the conflict were to be frozen right now, it would be advantage to Russia because the Russians currently control about a fifth of Ukrainian territory. Ukraine, of course, would not be wanting to be seen as conceding any territory. And mind you, much of the heavy-duty arsenal which Ukraine was promised in terms of the tanks, the Abrams tanks promised by the United States, the Leopards by Germany, so on and so forth, they will actually get deployed and be in full service on the battlefield sometime closer to the summer, maybe in April and May. This spring offensive, which we're already seeing from the Russian side, Ukraine is holding on. You can see from what reports that we're getting in Bakhmut, that Ukraine is desperately trying to hold on to some of its positions in the eastern part of the country. But it is going to be a tough ask. It's going to be a tall ask from the Ukrainian army and from the Ukrainian soldiers. But I think as long as this NATO pipeline of funds and military aid and weapons keeps coming, Ukraine has an incentive to keep fighting, or at least has the means and the wherewithal to keep fighting. And I think that's going to be the critical aspect in this war. It's going to be how quickly Russia can force the Ukrainian side to come to the negotiating table, or how versus the resilience of the Ukrainian people and the Ukrainian forces to stretch this conflict for as long as they can and push back Russia to as close a position as possible as existed before the 24th of February 2022.
Right.
Xi Jinping's sort of main agenda in Moscow is going to be this: to try and size up Vladimir Putin and tell him that, look, you can't do this forever war. This war has been going on for the better part of over a year now. You cannot be seen as driving this war endlessly. At some point, you need to accept the reality that the West will not turn off that tap. And as long as the West is going to continue to keep pumping in money and military aid, this is not an even contest. This is as good as a proxy war between Russia and the West. And that is not what Putin wanted to start off with. He wanted a war between Ukraine and Russia, which he thought he could finish in a matter of weeks. Now it's turned out to be a full-blown proxy war between Russia on the one side and NATO, for all practical purposes, on the other side. So I think if the Chinese were able to pull this off, and I think it's a huge if, it's a huge task, it's of an order of magnitude that is far higher than the effort that's gone into the Iran-Saudi Arabia deal. If the Chinese were to pull this off, if Xi Jinping were to pull this off, I think in a stroke, just through this move alone, the world order would have changed. So I think that is really what the Chinese are playing at, and that is particularly what Xi Jinping is playing at, because he realizes this is his third term. He has at best maybe another 5 years, or if he can really stretch it, another 10. And this is the term when leaders around the world want to leave a sort of legacy or want to leave some kind of a footnote in history. How is Xi Jinping going to be remembered? How is his foreign policy going to be remembered? He certainly will be known now for the Iran-Saudi Arabia deal. But if he were able to pull this off, convincing both Russia and Ukraine to move towards a ceasefire, to end the hostilities, that would be, for want of a better phrase, a coup. Nothing else, I think, would suffice in qualification for if the Chinese were to be able to pull this off. This is a significant meeting, no doubt about it, because this is the first major visit by the leader of a major country to Russia since this war began. This was on the 24th of February 2022. And the fact that Xi Jinping is going to Moscow is a big deal, because remember, the Chinese are just fresh off that very surprising deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia, which was brokered by Beijing. It was 4 days of secret talks that happened in Beijing, and now the Chinese are hoping that they can use some of that momentum, some of that leverage, if you will, into trying to broker some kind of a peace between Russia and Ukraine.
Welcome back, and there's some latest information coming in. This is about the crucial meeting between Russian President Vladimir Putin and Chinese President Xi Jinping. After landing in Moscow, Chinese President has issued a statement. He has said that China will work with Russia to uphold true multilateralism and promote a multipolar world, and he's confident that the visit will produce fruitful results. So that's a positive statement coming out there. A much closely watched visit between the two important powers of the world. I'm cutting across to my colleague Abhishek and getting more details on the story. Abhishek, what should we make of the statement? China has been touting some kind of a peace deal that it can broker between Russia and Ukraine. What does this statement signify?
So clearly, China is coming with an agenda that it not only wants to negotiate a peace deal between the Russia and Ukraine, but it also wants to, declare the fact at the world stage that it has the potential, it has the caliber to negotiate a peace deal, which nobody, no other part in the world has been able to do that. We know that Russia, there is this Chinese attempt will be not the first attempt to broker a peace deal. Earlier also we heard that Turkey was behind this deal. French President Emmanuel Macron, in the initial days of war, he was very much trying to find a peace, a space to have negotiation between the two sides. But finally, it looks like a major economic and military power China, if it is trying to venture into that territory, then clearly the seriousness of this intention is very can be understood. And also, since Russia happens to be a very close ally, and the Russian-Chinese alliance has been for decades a very trusted partnership, so one can imagine the fact that when China will be talking about a peace deal, it will have some sort of understanding from Russian side as well, and it will take care of the Russian interests as well. And this is where the problem starts for this peace deal.
This deal means much for Russia as well, Abhishek, because Russia has been facing a lot of isolation, and the warrant that came from the International Court of Criminal Justice is also some kind of testament to how the entire world and the global community, especially the Western powers, view the Russian actions in Ukraine. It's also seeking some kind of validation from the quote-unquote non-Western powers of the world.
We can say that the International Court of Justice warrant was against the Russian president, and it was more for a condemnation of Russian action against Ukraine, because it doesn't have any legal bearing on Russia that Russian side will be coerced, or there can be any sanction against Russia. But it is just a bad publicity, bad PR for the Russian President Vladimir Putin. And this is what Chinese president has also said, that the International Court of Justice or the criminal justice system should not be politicized, because apparently there is an immunity, a political immunity for any leader of any country, that such warrants cannot be issued. So clearly, if we talk from the Russian perspective, then this is a politicization of the court that Russia has highlighted.
Abhishek Jha getting us all the details. Joining us on the broadcast is also Alexander Brzezinski, who's a senior Russian journalist. Aina Tangan, who's a political affairs commentator, is also joining us on the broadcast. Aina, coming to you first. This visit is of much importance to the Russian and the Chinese, especially for the Russian, who have been facing some kind of international isolation and a special condemnation coming in from the Western superpowers. When Chinese presented this some kind of formula for having a peace deal between Russia and Ukraine, what are the possibilities that it can be turned into a reality?
Well, As I just said that previously, I think this peaceful plan is actually not even the plan itself, although it's called plan. It's like sort of a foundation, ground foundation for something, just an ability to talk to both sides. What we will hear probably is then after the visit, if the President Xi will lay his opinion to President Zelensky, that at least some kind of a signal is given so that sides could work on something. But it's very difficult now to predict what they could work together because the situation on the ground does not allow for talks. I mean, the land is there, is captured by, taken into, incorporated within the Russian constitution. So it's very difficult to say, we give you this land back.
Alexander, coming to you and taking in a point of view, for the Russians, what kind of importance does this visit really hold? And more importantly, will it help Russia in doing away with the isolation that it faces right now?
Well, in a sort of a way, yes. You know, Xi is a great statesman of a great country, of the second, one of the largest economies in the world, and of course a powerful player. And then he comes to Russia during this time is actually a very big signal. I'd like to mention one thing, which is actually sort of like, I find very interesting that Chairman Xi was met by the deputy minister, not with Mr. Putin himself or with somebody more a higher official. And the Chinese play a lot of role to this. I don't know why that's happening and what is that really shows anything or just is an occasion. So that's one thing.
Yeah.
The second thing, yes, of course, it plays a big role, and the Chinese are, of course, saying that, we are kind of like supporting you unofficially, but they're not going to give any arms or anything. That's just itself, it's a good photo opportunity for mostly Putin.
All right. Einar, taking those points to you, the Chinese are providing quote-unquote international political support to the Russians. What is it in this visit for Xi Jinping?
Well, Xi Jinping has emerged on the stage as a leader that's interested in peace. He's shown that with the Iran, Saudi Arabian beginnings. He's not dictating policy. This isn't like the U.S. where they come in with an agenda and they say you have to bend to it. Basically, what you have is he's gathering people and say, look, you need to talk. And the first part of talking is, having some sort of relations where you can get around a table. And that's exactly, I agree with my counterpart in Russia. This is exactly what Xi is trying to do. But there's two important points here. First, China is pursuing its own agenda. And what I mean by that is in the past, it was somewhat passive. It would react to U.S. actions and policies and things like that. No longer. Ever since Anchorage, a couple of years ago, China has been much more assertive about laying out its desires and how it sees the world. Second, China is extremely worried about the trajectory of this war.
Yeah.
Because what you have is on one side, if the Russians were to win, they would be in a situation where they might have a hostile civilian population, which would drain their resources, be untenable. On the other side, if the Ukrainians were to win, it could threaten nuclear action.
Okay.
So neither one, very palatable. So at this time, I think Xi is trying very hard to appeal to those who want peace, especially Europe, Western Europe, who would be, very happy if this war was somehow contained. But there's a trust element there.
Yeah.
Both Merkel and Holland admitted that they had no intention of following through on the first two peace treaties, Minsk I and Minsk II. So the question is, how do you get over that trust deficit if you're going to try to go forward with the Europeans?
So, Einar, would you construe this as one of the other moves that the Chinese have made, or, Xi Jinping has made, when it comes to challenging the Western hegemony, the global order, the world order dominated by the US is something that the Chinese have continuously disliked and have challenged repeatedly. Should this visit be seen yet another way while the Chinese are trying to make that statement?
Well, I think it's wrong to put it in terms of a challenge. They're dissatisfied with U.S. hegemony. I mean, the endless wars, since World War II, the U.S. is involved in 81% of all conflicts around the world. I mean, I don't know anybody who's trying to defend the actions that the U.S. took in Iraq or Afghanistan or, and so many treaties broken and undermining the World Trade Organization. These are not the actions of responsible parties. So China is simply putting out its own ideas about these, global security initiative, global development initiative, and the newest one is a global civilization initiative, which basically says countries have the right to choose their own, and they need to be respected on the terms of their choices.
Alexander, a lot of people are worried about, a lot of experts are worried that this could be some kind of cooperation between the Chinese and the Russians when it comes to arms. And, God forbid, that could lead to some kind of escalation in Ukraine. Do you anticipate something like that would happen? Because you said a few minutes ago that it's unlikely that the two sides are going to engage in that manner.
Definitely. I mean, the China and Russia, despite conducting exercises a lot, they are not involved in they have some military cooperation, but definitely they're not involved in some kind of military union, or China does not have any kind of NATO kind of thing with Russia. And of course, for China to give arms to Russia, that's very big, significant step to an escalation. How come you can be a peace broker and at the same time you are actually supplying arms? I'm not talking about some kind of a small weaponry or pistols or whatever stuff. I'm talking about real guns, right? It's very interesting. Also, I just want to make a point. Yes, also my counterpart in the U.S. Has mentioned that Iraqi war, today's anniversary. So I think there's a very interesting to learn from the mistakes of others, right? And not to repeat the same things. But now you have very good students in Moscow who are learning from the bad experience that America has conducted. At that time, Russia and Europe has actually stayed against the American invasion in Iraq, and now Russia is actually doing almost the same in its own policy. I'm not comparing, of course, Mr. Saddam Hussein to President Zelensky, who is much more a nicer person, right? But I'm just saying that, removing someone and then doing something what you want.
All right, gentlemen, this indeed has been an intriguing conversation. Thank you for your time and thank you for joining us on the broadcast. Well, there are multiple angles to this story. CNN News 18's managing editor Zaka Jacob explains to you how a peace plan over Ukraine war is going to be on the agenda when Xi Jinping meets the Russian president in Moscow. And that meeting is happening. All eyes on that. Let's have a look.
Achieving a breakthrough in Ukraine would be a much harder task than the Saudi-Iran deal. And that's particularly so because both sides in the war believe that too much of this war is yet to be played out on the battlefield. Neither side has shown an inclination to stop the fighting. Beijing, nevertheless, has an active interest in bringing an end to this conflict. The war has put China in a precarious situation. On the one hand, it has had to balance its no-limits partnership with Russia. Xi Jinping has been careful to not come across as overly supporting this war effort, particularly on the issue of territorial sovereignty and integrity, which is a red line for China. At the same time, China has also tried to forge a fine balance in maintaining its ties with Washington and its European partners, trying to keep its image as a neutral power. Last month, China cast itself as a neutral mediator, calling for a ceasefire and for peace talks to end the war in Ukraine. It released a 12-point peace document. China's foreign ministry called for the pursuit of a political solution to the conflict and an end to unilateral sanctions. It also appeared to warn Moscow against escalating the conflict with nuclear weapons. Russia's government at that time said that it shared Beijing's views of this conflict, but it did not see the scope for cessation of hostilities, not at this stage. The first item in China's peace plan was respecting the sovereignty of all countries, and that is a bedrock of Beijing's foreign policy. It is also one that has been tested over this last 1 year because of Russia's invasion. China officially regards Ukraine as a sovereign country, and Xi Jinping and Vladimir Zelensky had a phone call to mark 30 years of ties between Kiev and Moscow just a few weeks before the Russian troops attacked. And yet Beijing has refrained so far in the last 1 year from condemning outright Russia's military action in Ukraine. Neither has China called the Russian military action as an invasion. The Ukrainian administration says that Kiev is cautiously receptive to China's possible peace plan. They welcome the clauses on territorial integrity and the nuclear safety guarantees, but they were concerned that China's plan does not mention anything on the withdrawal of Russian troops from the territory that it has occupied post the 24th of February last year. And therein lies the rub. Because until Vladimir Putin concedes some, if not all of the territory which Ukraine had before this war began, any peace deal will be a non-starter. It will not fly either in Kiev or in Washington. China clearly has its task cut out.
Well, that story and much more on our website news18.com. For now, slipping into a very short break. Stay tuned.
Sometime closer to the summer, maybe in April and May. This spring offensive, which we're already seeing from the Russian side, Ukraine is holding on. You can see from what reports that we're getting in Bakhmut, that Ukraine is desperately trying to hold on to some of its positions in the eastern part of the country. But it is going to be a tough ask. It's going to be a tall ask from the Ukrainian army and from the Ukrainian soldiers. But I think as long as this NATO pipeline of funds and military aid and weapons keeps coming, Ukraine has an incentive to keep fighting, or at least has the means and the wherewithal to keep fighting. And I think that's going to be the critical aspect in this war. It's going to be how quickly Russia can force the Ukrainian side to come to the negotiating table, or how versus the resilience of the Ukrainian people and the Ukrainian forces to stretch this conflict for as long as they can and push back Russia to as close a position as possible as existed before the 24th of February 2022.
Right.
Xi Jinping's sort of main agenda in Moscow is going to be this: to try and size up Vladimir Putin and tell him that, look, you can't do this forever war. This war has been going on for the better part of over a year now. You cannot be seen as driving this war endlessly. At some point, you need to accept the reality that the West will not turn off that tap. And as long as the West is going to continue to keep pumping in money and military aid, this is not an even contest. This is as good as a proxy war between Russia and the West. And that is not what Putin wanted to start off with. He wanted a war between Ukraine and Russia, which he thought he could finish in a matter of weeks. Now it's turned out to be a full-blown proxy war between Russia on the one side and NATO, for all practical purposes, on the other side. So I think if the Chinese were able to pull this off, and I think it's a huge if, it's a huge task, it's of an order of magnitude that is far higher than the effort that's gone into the Iran-Saudi Arabia deal. If the Chinese were to pull this off, if Xi Jinping were to pull this off, I think in a stroke, just through this move alone, the world order would have changed. So I think that is really what the Chinese are playing at, and that is particularly what Xi Jinping is playing at, because he realizes this is his third term. He has at best maybe another 5 years, or if he can really stretch it, another 10. And this is the term when, leaders around the world want to leave a sort of legacy, or want to leave some kind of a footnote in history. How is Xi Jinping going to be remembered? How is his foreign policy going to be remembered? He certainly will be known now for the Iran-Saudi Arabia deal. But if he were able to pull this off, convincing both Russia and Ukraine to move towards a ceasefire, to end the hostilities, that would be, for want of a better phrase, a coup. Nothing else, I think, would suffice in qualification for if the Chinese were to be able to pull this off. This is a significant meeting, no doubt about it, because this is the first major visit by the leader of a major country to Russia since this war began. This was on the 24th of February 2022, and the fact that Xi Jinping is going to Moscow is a big deal, because remember, the Chinese are just fresh off that very surprising deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia, which was brokered by Beijing. It was 4 days of secret talks that happened in Beijing, and now the Chinese are hoping that they can use some of that momentum, some of that leverage, if you will, into trying to broker some kind of a peace between Russia and Ukraine. China had a few days ago unveiled a 12-point peace plan, which ticks off all the right boxes, which is respecting territorial integrity and sovereignty, warning against any escalation, certainly not by nuclear weapons. It also talks about how Russia's concerns have to be addressed, but essentially moving, or at least trying to move both sides to some kind of a negotiated settlement, if not a ceasefire to start with, and then eventually to a negotiated settlement. The problem is, both from Moscow and from Kiev, the response to this 12-point peace plan put forth by China was rather lukewarm. And that is because for Russia, and for Vladimir Putin in particular, he needs some kind of an off-ramp solution. Something needs to be given to him so that he can then move towards cessation of hostilities. On the other hand, for Zelensky and for Ukraine, this is almost an existential crisis. I mean, they cannot be seen as conceding any amount of territory to Russia, because that would be de facto then recognizing the fact that Russia used forcible means to acquire what used to be Ukrainian territory prior to 24th of February 2022. So the problem really in the Chinese plan or any move towards peace is essentially this. If the conflict were to be frozen as it stands today, then about a fifth of Ukrainian territory will go to Russia. Is that acceptable to Ukraine? Is that acceptable to the United States, to its European partners? As of today, no. So the game that's being played by both sides, both by Russia and by Ukraine right now, is to try and force a more decisive outcome on the battlefield. From the Ukrainian point of view, that would be to try and push the Russians as far back as possible to the pre-24th February 2022 position. From the Russian side, that would be to try and fortify its existing presence in the Donbass. Remember, Putin's sort of stated objective when he launched this war was to try and get this sort of a direct line access from the Donbass through the Sea of Azov into Crimea. Crimea, of course, was annexed by Russia back in 2014. So these are the live pictures that we're getting. You can see there'll be a lot of pomp and ceremony because remember, both the Chinese and the Russians are heavy on diplomatic pageantry, as it were. So you will see a lot of that from the runway to the talks table at the Kremlin tomorrow. You're going to see a lot of pomp and pageantry associated with this visit. For Vladimir Putin, he needs Xi Jinping to try and establish some kind of legitimacy. Remember, he had been shunned by major capitals around the world, certainly by the United States, by its European partners. People were not willing to give in to Putin's aggression, thereby giving him any form of legitimacy. Xi Jinping on Russian soil in Moscow, and these pictures are being broadcast by global channels around the world. This will send a message that here is the leader of the second biggest economy in the world standing shoulder to shoulder with Putin, giving him some kind of an endorsement, if you will, despite the aggression and despite the Chinese time and time again saying that they do not believe in violation of territorial integrity or sovereignty of any nation state. Also remember, we've had these reports from both the Wall Street Journal and from Reuters that Xi Jinping, right after his visit to Moscow, is likely to speak to Vladimir Zelensky either via telephone or through a virtual call. And there again, we're given to understand that China is really pressing its foot on this 12-point peace plan. Whether or not something material will come out of that, we don't know, because like I said, if the conflict were to be frozen today, Ukraine will have to give up some territory, and that they're not in any mood to right now. Neither are their benefactors in the US and in European countries. But it depends on how much China is able to convince not just the Ukrainian side, but of course they do say China has a lot of leverage vis-a-vis Russia. But then you never know with Vladimir Putin. He's a man of his own. He has his own mind. He makes calculations basis his own interests. And his calculation going into this war certainly was that this would quickly get wrapped up. The Zelensky regime would be changed. There will be a new regime, more pliable to him.
Welcome back, and there's some latest news coming in. Let's cut across to that. And after visiting the Buddha Jayanti Park, Japanese Prime Minister is seen enjoying some Pani Puri with Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Well, those are the visuals on your screen. What is a visit to India without some Pani Puri? Let's try and listen.
इसका एक disconnect है.
Well, those are the visuals on the screen. Abhishek, some Pani Puri for the Japanese Prime Minister.
Of course, and having been in Delhi and not tasting the street food would not be fair if you have to visit Delhi. Also, you know that Pani Puri is one of the most favorite street food of Delhi, and when Prime Minister is eating, Japanese Prime Minister Kishida is taking him around with us at the park. So he's really trying to treat him and please him with the best of the street food of Delhi. And what else could be the best than this Golgappa, which is the quintessential Delhi street food. And with that also, we know that the season of mangoes and the raw mangoes have come. So the Ampana is going to be the one most essential drink for everybody in this season of summer, and the season has started. Prime Minister is cooking his friend and his Japanese Prime Minister Kishida with these two most awaited and most celebrated street food from Delhi.
Well, Abhishek, apart from trade and technology, there's also a cultural proximity that the two nations of India and Japan have enjoyed historically. That's exactly what is visible in these pictures. And as Abhishek rightly said, if you're in the national capital, if you're in Delhi, and if you don't get a taste of the street food, then your visit is not complete. And that holds true for the Japanese Prime Minister as well. Multiple things on the agenda, of course, ahead of the G20 key summit in the month of September. This visit and this meeting is going to be very important. India and Japan enjoy close cooperation in terms of technology, trade, and many other important aspects. And let's see what lies ahead, especially ahead of the G20 summit. Well, we'll continue tracking this and much more here on CNN News 18. Right now, it's a wrap on this edition. Shivani Gupta joins you with Plain Speak.
Welcome everyone. Thanks a lot for staying with us. You're watching Plain Speak with me, Shivani Gupta. From Australia to the United States to the United Kingdom, Khalistani goons are going on a rampage, denouncing Punjab Police's crackdown on Amritpal Singh, for example, in India. In London, something unprecedented happened. Pro-Khalistani supporters barged into the Indian High Commission and tried to pull down the tricolour. Windows were smashed, slogans were raised against Punjab and central government. And there were no efforts, frankly, from the UK cops to stop these Khalistani vandals. Something similar played out in the United States. Pro-Khalistani supporters vandalizing the Indian consulate in San Francisco. Doors were broken, slogans were chanted. If this wasn't enough, Khalistan backers made graffiti on the wall of the building with the words, "Free Amritpal." As the crackdown on Amritpal Singh takes place in India,